Shabbat Shalom. Shana Tova. So at the beginning of the last century, Rabbi Aryeh Levin, a great rabbi from Lithuania, moved to Jerusalem. He was living and working in Palestine, and then later when it became Israel, until his death in 1969. And he was known by many as the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim, right? The righteous one of Jerusalem. And this story is maybe one piece of that puzzle. Rabbi Levin spent his days learning, as great rabbis tend to do, but he also did Bikur Cholim, he also visited the sick, he also did Nichum Avelim, he comforted the mourners, and he would walk on Shabbos afternoon to the British prison to spend time with young Jewish dissidents who had been arrested. Rabbi Aryeh Levin lived in the neighborhood of Mishkanot, which is a frum community near Machane Yehuda Shuk. In those days, it wasn't exclusively ultra-Orthodox, however. And Rabbi Levin was known by those both in the frum community and in the Chiloni, in the secular community. He was humble and he was modest, and he was beloved by all, whether they attended his synagogue, whether they attended a synagogue at all. All of the Jews in the neighborhood appreciated his kindness and his empathy. And he loved Shabbat, of course. Rabbi Levin wanted to create a peaceful atmosphere for himself, for his family, for his neighborhood, and so he gently went around during the week and he would talk to the various Jewish shopkeepers who worked in the community, and one by one he would persuade them to close their stores on Shabbos. The goal, he explained, wasn't to make them religious, it was to extend a calm, contemplative atmosphere throughout the community on this holy day. And Rabbi Levin was successful. All of the shopkeepers in the neighborhood eventually closed their stores on Shabbat, except for one. There was this one shopkeeper who refused to go along with the plan. Though the rabbi spoke gently and compassionately, as rabbis always do, the shopkeeper felt, since he was not observant himself, there was no good reason that he needed to close his shop. Plus, what about all the customers that came on Friday evenings when the sun set early on Fridays in the winter? And what about on Saturdays? They depended on him, and of course he benefited too from their business. Well, one Friday evening, as he always did, Rabbi Levin got dressed up in his finest garments and got ready to go to shul. And as the sun was setting, he began to walk. But instead of turning in the direction of the synagogue, he walked in exactly the opposite direction. People who saw him were, of course, surprised. What's the rabbi doing walking away from shul on Shabbos? And they were even more surprised when they saw him walk into the storekeeper's shop. Levin entered. He wished the owner a Shabbat Shalom, and he asked if he could sit in the store for a bit. He needed to rest. Well, the store owner felt honored by the rabbi's presence, and he was also concerned about his wariness. Though he did not wish to close his shop on Shabbat, like most of the neighborhood, he adored Rabbi Levin. So he brought the rabbi a small stool for him to sit on, and he put it in the corner of the store. And the rabbi sat in the corner of the store. And business went on. Kabbalat Shabbat, meanwhile, began at the synagogue a few blocks away, but the rabbi wasn't there. He remained sitting in the corner of the store. And he watched, just sat there and watched as people came into the store through the doors. They brought newspapers, they bought foodstuffs, they bought cigarettes, they laughed, they talked with each other. And after about an hour and a half, the rabbi got up. He thanked the shopkeeper for allowing him to sit and rest his weary legs. He wished him a Shabbat Shalom, and he left. Well, you could imagine the owner of the store was a bit confused. Why had the rabbi come into his store on Shabbat? Of course, he didn't buy anything, but he couldn't have needed to rest for that long. Why had he stayed? Why had he sat in the corner on that stool? Why wasn't he in synagogue? And this was really kind of gnawing at the shopkeeper. So on Sunday morning, he went by the rabbi's house and he knocked on Rabbi Levine's door. And he said, when the rabbi came to the door, "Can we talk for a moment?" Of course, Rabbi Levine, being a pleasant, wonderful, learned rabbi, invited him in. They sat down. "Listen, I need to know, why is it that you came by my store on Friday night?" The tzaddik of Yerushalayim thought for a moment, and then he replied, "You know, I've asked you many times to close your shop on Shabbos, but I never bothered to try to understand why you insisted on keeping it open. So I wanted to see for myself what it's like, what's at stake if you were to close. I wanted to see with my eyes. I wanted to feel with my heart what I was actually asking you to give up." Now, I realize how difficult it would be for you to do so, having sat there and watched the commerce that occurred in your store, how much business you do on Friday nights. And I also notice how much the store means to the part of our community who is not Shomer Shabbat. And now I have to tell you, having spent some time in your store, I get it. And I can't ask you. I won't ask you to close your store on Shabbat. The shopkeeper, meanwhile, was incredibly moved by Rabbi Levine's words. And guess what? The next Shabbat, the store was closed. So my friends, tonight begins Rosh Hashanah, of course, and of course it's also Shabbat. This new year also kicks off our year of a thematic year focused on peoplehood. We'll explore the perimeters and possibilities of community and of peoplehood. I'm curious, how many of you were a little disappointed when you heard that the shopkeeper closed his store? Anyone? Oh, come on, really? Nobody was? I was actually a little disappointed. I'm like, come on, really? So some of you may be, most of you it seems are not. Most of you seem to think that it's a heartwarming ending, and that's great if that's your experience of the story. Maybe some of you on the stream are thinking, you know, despite Rabbi Levine seeming like a wonderful guy, maybe that this was a bit of a ploy, right? Maybe you're being a little cynical and thinking, okay, he sort of did what he needed to do to get the guy to do what he wanted him to. But others of you may be thinking this is a wonderful ending to the story. And I'm actually less concerned about the ending. I'm much more intrigued by how these two people found common ground. The story, I think, challenges our expectation about Orthodox rabbis, about secular Israelis, about how or who bends for the other, about what it means during Israel's 75th year to create a shared Jewish society. There are a lot of ways to think about Jewishness, but one thing is clear. From the beginning, we've had a strong sense of the collective, this notion of Am Yisrael. In Vayikra, in Leviticus, we're warned of a curse. Fleeing as though from the sword you shall fall, though none pursues, with no one pursuing, you shall stumble over one another. In other words, when we don't work together, we don't need enemies to destroy us. We tend to do that to ourselves. Why, asks the Talmud, Shekol Yisrael Aravim ze bezeh. All Israel is bound up with one another. Now, the verb aravim is used both in contract law and in weaving. Whether we like it or not, and sometimes we don't, we Jews are accountable to one another. Our destinies are intertwined. They're interwoven like a great piece of fabric. In this year of my blessing is that we may be more fully appreciative of why this matters. And we may be inclined to sit in one another's stores and homes and hearts, listening and striving to know more and to better understand what it means to do right by one another. That wouldn't be a bad way to spend the year, would it? Shabbat Shalom. Shana Tova.